Greetings. It's a pleasure to be back and it's a pleasure to be having these conversations. It's been a couple of weekends that I've not been able to come back to this, but then finally we are here. So for today, I'm going to talk about the imperative for Kenya Drug Authority Bill and how and why we need to get engaged in the conversation that are happening. And this untimely conversation, especially that the Kenya Drug Authority Bill is in Parliament, is being debated and being reviewed from different facets and different stakeholders are coming on. So when everybody is coming into the table, then you need to ask yourself the question, why is it that different stakeholders are interested? That is one. Two, why is it important that we have this KDA bill coming into force and being implemented? That's a critical conversation. I know there are different factions with different perspectives and different approaches as to why or why not we should have a KDA bill in place. And as much as all these arguments and these conversations are important and legitimate concerns are being raised, we need to ask ourselves, why is it important for us to move forward with it? How do we move forward with it? And do we ensure that it has the controls? How do we make that happen? Because controls are critical for us in terms of operations, practice, and everything that is moving forward. So that is a critical bit for us to acknowledge. So first things first, the KDA bill. This bill is being proposed in the parliament and it's coming as an individual member's bill that is being driven forward. And as at the moment, the person leading the conversation is the chairperson of the Parliamentary Health Committee in the Kenyan Parliament. And as that is happening, one, we have to acknowledge, where does KDA come from? KDA is a bill that is proposed to come in force to address issues on regulation of trade, supply, and handling of pharmaceutical products and chemicals in the country of Kenya. And as this control is coming around, then we need to ask ourselves, how has it been happening? Because we cannot be talking about regulation and control of trade and actually the handling of pharmaceutical products, chemicals, and technologies in the Kenyan landscape unless there were others, or if there wasn't, then the question would be, why were there not any? There were controls in place, and there have been controls in place even at the current moment as we're talking about these. There are controls and regulations on the trade of pharmaceuticals, chemicals, and medical technologies. This has been encompassed and actually integrated within the Cap 244 of the Kenyan Constitution, that is the Pharmacy and Poisons Act, which was first published and actually in 1956, 1957, 1st of May is when it started operational. Commencement, that is, took off. So 1956, 1957, to date, we've been having the Pharmacy and Poisons Act, Cap 244, which has been enforced regulating pharmacy practice, that is the profession of pharmacy, but also the regulation of medicines, healthcare technologies, and chemicals at large. So with that regulation having been in place, it means the mandate that was granted to the Pharmacy and Poisons Board, the regulatory agency that is established under the Act of Parliament, Cap 244, has been enforced and has been executing on this role. Honestly and transparently, as we all acknowledge, every regulation has to go through different phases of different challenges, and these challenges create room for either amendments, repeal of the same acts of parliament, but at the same time, need for investment in the implementing agencies, the enforcement institutions, in this case, the Pharmacy and Poisons Board. Has it been successful and effective in the delivery of its mission? On different accounts, yes, and also there has been lapses, and these are rooms for improvement, but rather than avenues to castigate the authority for what it has or has not been able to do. So acknowledging that, we are moving forward in the KDA bill, which is being proposed and it being tabled in Parliament in a couple of weeks to come or thereabout. As much as the KDA bill is coming, Kenya Drug Authority, I think there's more for us to ask ourselves, where is it being established? We need regulations. And handling of pharmaceuticals, chemicals, and technologies is a very critical aspect, because you're not dealing with sweets, you're not dealing with foods, and you're not dealing with sweets, or you're not dealing with vehicles or electronic just for the phones that you're dealing with. These are not general products that you're dealing with. These are human products that are being used for medical conditions and are dealt with ensuring either somebody gets well from a sickness or they die. Either somebody recovers or develops a disability. We need to ensure that we are looking at those controls being clear and being effective. And the basic principle as to why we have regulations is to ensure they're safe, effective, and quality pharmaceutical products and technologies being made accessible to the patients and the consumers who rely on these products to make quality outputs of their lives and their livelihoods. Very critical for us to acknowledge. So with that said then, as per the current provisions in the KDA bill, is it robust enough? Is it comprehensive? That should be the first question we ask ourselves. What would we entail to be critical in being regulated in the KDA bill? We know medicines, the general medicines. We need to see that there are advances that are being made. We have biotherapeutic and biological products. We have gene and precision medicine. All the novel technologies that are coming in the management of diseases and treatment of patients have to be considered, because unless we regulate for them, we are going to create a gap in the regulation, and this gap might or might not be covered for and addressed in timely manner. 1956 to date, that is over 50 years of practice where we've been having the same bill. That is 60 plus years of practice where we've been governed by the same bill. There is need for change, and that change has come at a moment, and that moment that we have now is to ensure that the final output of these conversations is an effective bill that is going to drive caucus and drive engagements to having a better regulatory authority and better regulations in the industry. That is one. The scope of the regulations, at the current moment we know there are medicines for human use, there are medicines for veterinary products, there are other chemicals, whether in terms of the development and manufacturing of these pharmaceuticals or for other operations and other activities. Who regulates these chemicals? We need to ensure that the regulations are encompassing, but at the same time they have clear scope of regulation and who is responsible for each of them that is going to come into place. And that is, we're talking about human medicine, we're talking about veterinary medicines, we're talking about food supplements and chemicals. We need cosmetics to be regulated in a robust way. How do we ensure that the regulations do not serve as an impediment to the means and ability to do business, but at the same time safeguard the interests of the public? What chemicals do we have in these products that need to be regulated and controlled? So those are critical imperatives and critical concerns that we need to be looking into. And the other thing that is very critical for us as we are looking at the KDA bill as it's being proposed and being engaged, we don't operate and we don't work in silos, in a vacuum. We operate in a context where, as a country, we are part of the East African community. The East African community, part of the African continent, and therefore we are members of the African Union with clear regulations on different aspects. Then beyond that, we are members of international treaties and agreements, that is including the World Trade Organization. So across all these treaties and all these engagements that we've come into, we need to acknowledge that there are treaties that we subscribe to, and therefore we are governed and our operations are controlled by them. And if that is the case, then we need to ask ourselves, is it that when we are developing our own internal laws and regulations, are they in tandem with the international treaties? Are they in tandem with the regional conventions and agreements that we are party to? And if not, how do we ensure that happens? And in this particular context, what I would encourage of us is to look at what are the provisions on one, the AU model law on regulations of medicines and healthcare products and technologies. What is espoused, and as we are moving towards Africa Medicines Agency, the Africa Medicine Regulatory Harmonization conversation have been in place. Then we have the East Africa Medicines Regulatory Harmonization. What are the best practices? What is envisioned by the AU model law on regulation of medicines and healthcare products and technologies? Are these integral and actually components of the current conversation that we're talking about in the KDA bill as it's being proposed? If not, how do we make changes in the rules to ensure that they are encompassing and they're actually effective in ensuring we are compliant with the international treaties? So that is one of them. Two, we need to ask ourselves, the AMA Treaty, currently as a country, we've signed the treaty, and I'm hoping the ratification would be concluding the next couple of weeks or so. And if that ratification happens, then we need to ask ourselves, does the current regulation and the bill that we are proposing in Parliament align with that provision and that aspiration within the KDA, within the AMA Treaty, Africa Medicines Agency Treaty? If it doesn't, we need to ensure that we are moving forward and ensuring that these bills and these acts of Parliament, and including treaties, are speaking to each other. They are in tandem. That is critical. From a business perspective, we need to understand that we're signatories to the World Trade Organization as member country, and in that case, we need to ensure that we are promoting ethical business practices, and ethical business practices ensuring that we are looking out for the IP rights. And that is why we have the World International IP Organization, WIPO. But at the same time, as country, we have the Kenya Intellectual Property Institute, KIPI. So when we're looking at the intellectual property component that are being looked into, how do we ensure that the regulation does not expose us to the risks that are attributed by infringement on international treaties? And we understand that infringing on any of these treaties will definitely have a repercussion in terms of whether they are incentivizing research and development and innovation in the pharmaceutical value chain, or drawing back on these particular challenges, particular advances that we've made we need to ensure that we are creating room for IP protection and development, but at the same time ensuring that we are creating room to ensure there's reliable access and quality access of these products within the landscape, so that people do not suffer adverse event because of the business imperatives. So that balance is critical for us to ensure it is attained and it is maintained. On the same note, there are current conversations, and these are imperatives and discussions points that people have been having around parallel importation, the regulation thereabout, and what is the need for such. One key thing that we need to be clear about is parallel importation is a global provision, internationally acknowledged and recognized. But then there are provisions upon which the parallel importation of medicines and healthcare products and technologies has to take place. As medicines, we have particular shelf life, particular conditions, particular formulation formulas that are being applied in the development of medicines. It means whenever I'm bringing in a product into one market and not in another, there are particular frameworks and priorities that we've looked into and criteria, and that is why every product coming into the market have a certificate of analysis that has to be in tandem with the specifications for which it was made. It has to be manufactured in the right GMP compliant facility. When we're looking at the PI provisions, are we going to ensure that we are following up across the value chain to ensure the product is manufactured from a legitimately acknowledged and actually accredited GMP lab, distributed through the good distribution practices, made accessible in the pharmacy or in the clinical setting through qualified professionals and in compliance with the normal national standards of provision that needs to be there? Are they within the key temperature climatic zones that they are recommended for use, so that they do not get degraded within the time frame before they are completely used? And so these are conversations and these are imperatives that we need to be cognizant of, because unless we look out for all these, there will be lapses and there will be avenues for people to access products which might not be ideal for them, and it means we will have failed in our role in terms of ensuring we ring fence and regulate the practice in the local ecosystem, which is very critical for us and very important at this particular moment in time. And another thing that we need to be looking at is, this is coming as a repeal of the Pharmacy and Poisons Act, Cap 244, which was regulating both practice and trade of pharmaceuticals and products. Therefore, then it's going to regulate products. How does the regulation of practice continue? And that is where we need to acknowledge that in practice, there are different tiers and cadres of practice. And as much as there are different cadres of practice, every individual has the latitude and the scope within which they need to practice. Do we need to ensure that the regulations come in a place where either we are giving a transitionary provision or propose an additional amendment and an additional parliamentary bill that will be regulating pharmacy practice? And that should ensure that the different cadres have clear scope of practice and clear scope of jurisdiction, which will ensure that patients have the highest quality of care and the highest quality of services, rather than opening it up to be a trade rather than a practice. Because the reason as to why we have professionals, because we profess particular set of knowledge and capabilities to be able to deliver certain set of skills and services in our professional practice. If we do not look out for such, then that would be a challenge. So how do we engage? One, we need to read the different provisions and different laws, as well as the KDA bill as per the proposal that we currently have in Parliament. In reviewing it, we need to come up with recommendation and pointing out what are the lapses and what are the avenues for us to infuse and actually share our contributions. 3, we need to ask ourselves, how is the act going to be implemented? That is the implementing structures and authorities. Currently, there is the proposed KDA, Kenya Drug Authority, and then the NQCL, National Quality Control Lab, which will have its own board. These different boards will have the overarching responsibilities in governing the strategic direction and the implementation of work that is being done by the authorities. That is one. Beyond that, we need to ask ourselves the key nitty-gritties on operational perspective. When we benchmark on international best practices, European Medicines Agency, we have the US FDA, the Japanese Medicines and Agency, we have the UK Medicines Health Regulations Authority, MHRA. All these authorities have particular scientific technical advisory committees with unique capabilities and unique skills in regulating particular set of products, particular set of advances. Does need to be integrated. And therefore, when we are coming up with the bill, we also need to ensure that the provisions for these technical committees and technical advisory councils will be in place to ensure the directions are going to be within the confines of their specialty, but at the same time opening avenues for long-term success and long-term development and growth of the society as we're moving for, and growth of the nation in terms of the pharma industry as it needs to be. Those are going to be very imperative and very critical for us. So we read them, we come up with recommendations and integrate these through the different forums. The different forums I'm talking about at this particular moment would be professional societies, industry boards, trade associations, and sector groups as we're talking about them. In Kenya, Pharmaceutical Society of Kenya, we have the Kenya Association of Pharmaceutical Industry, Kenya Healthcare Federation, Kenya Private Sector Alliance. Let us channel these contributions through these forums as much as possible and ensure that our contributions are getting to the right people in the right platforms so that we are able to ensure the final bill that is going to be passed will be robust and as effective as it needs to be. That is what we should aspire for, and that is what we should wish for. At the same time, we are practicing in different domains of work. And in these different domains, we all have aspirations, we all have envisions. We envision a future in these spaces. And there are also best practices that we are adopting and seeing how they are moving us to the future that we aspire for. Considering we have had over 60 years with the same bill, it means it should have envisioned this future where we are now. If you are going to come up with a new bill and a new act of parliament, it needs to be visionary. As much as we are going to contribute to this bill being passed and being integrated into our own regulatory frameworks, we need to ensure that it is envisioning a future that we aspire for. It is futuristic and visionary in its perspective. And that means the things and the control that you envision coming into space, the developments and innovation that are coming into the respective spaces that you're operating in have to be integrated, and you need to provide provision for that in your recommendations in the bill. And if we're able to do that, we will be a step ahead in terms of ensuring our regulatory framework in the pharma industry is robust enough. Our patients, populations, and communities, including me and you, are guaranteed that they'll have the access to the quality, safe, and effective medicines that they aspire for, that they wish to get. And they are guaranteed of that as per the Constitution, Article 48 of the Kenyan Constitution. If that happens, we'll have made our wins. With that, I put a break to this, and I urge you to read the KDA bill, read the different statutes and different treaties that we are signatories to, and ask yourself, what would success look like for us? And if you're able to envision that future, let's engage, let's have the conversation, let's make the future of pharmaceutical industry better together. Thank you and have a good one.